And with that, I hand it over to Keith. And welcome, everyone. My name is David Smith. Welcome to the Lean ITSM channel. Today, we're going to talk about helping business manage the disruptive technologies. I'm going to be your moderator. As we go through this, if you have any questions, please type them into your question box, and then we have a Q&A session that we're going to do at the end. And at this moment, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker and good friend of mine, Mr. Keith Vincent. Mr. Keith Vincent has been a member of IBM for a number of years. He's currently retired, and now he's an independent consultant. Keith has worked with IBM for over 35 years, and his experience includes managing quality, efficiency, and effectiveness of IT service delivery. And while Keith was at IBM, he spent a lot of time developing and teaching methods that are currently used by IBM's global consulting team on how to manage strategy and design. And with that, I hand it over to Keith, and take it away, Keith.
Thanks, David. And welcome, everybody. I'd like to start off with a bit of a story about a financial services company, some work we did a few years back. And this company was having issues of competitiveness and market share loss due to a number of disruptive changes that were coming from, at that time, emerging social and internet computing trends. And the work involved a full redesign of the services and processes that lasted about 9 months. And it was implemented successfully, but as we started to work with the solution, it became apparent that there were pieces of it that weren't meeting expectations. And we started to look at why this was. There were multiple small updates, changes that were required as we went forward. And it turns out that although it's been designed as a single system, and implemented that way, there were nuances within the solution that really didn't become evident until the actual solution was deployed. And those were the changes we were needing to make. And that is very similar to some of the challenges we'll find with disruptive technologies as we look through this presentation, that trying to implement a big system all at once has its risks of missing some of those nuances. And therefore, an approach called Lean, which is what I'm going to be talking about a fair bit during this presentation, which breaks things down into small iterative improvements and uses learning as we go through that, is often a much more effective way to do things. So if we take a look at the agenda, I'm going to basically talk about 7 topics in 3 major groupings. The first couple really are going to give you an overview. What are those technologies and what are some of the challenges? The next 3 items are going to be an approach that you might consider using. It's just an approach, but it's one that I think has merit in that it does leverage a lot of lean technologies. And then the last couple of items, that the signposts and keeping it alive, we'll just take a look at really how you might continue to move forward if this is the path that you choose to follow. So with that, I've mentioned disruptive technologies a couple of times. What are they? Basically, there's 4 that we're going to be talking about in this presentation: social, mobile, analytic, and cloud, often referred to as SMAC or the SMAC stack. And social deals with really things like how do you integrate things like Facebook or Twitter or blogs and all of those similar kind of things into your environment, into your business plans. Mobile deals with really things like tablets and remote computing. Internet of Things is often the term that gets used around mobile, and how do you manage that? Analytic deals with big data. A lot of data out there. We're creating more and more data all the time, and yet how do we turn that data into meaningful information that can help the business make better decisions? And then cloud, of course, is the new delivery paradigm around IT service delivery. So those are the 4 technologies. And at this point, just want to do a little bit of a poll to get your input in terms of which of those are top of mind for you. So, David, if you could run the poll, that would be great.
Okay, I'm starting the poll now. So you should see that question pop up on your screen, and you have a selection of A, social media, B, mobile, C, analytics, and D, cloud. I'm waiting for some results coming in. Okay, we've got the results coming in. It looks like we're just about done here. Okay, let's review. Let's take a look. And that's where we end up, and hopefully you can see the slides.
Okay. Thanks, David. Appreciate that. That just helps give us a little bit of perspective in terms of as we go through, and also some comments that David will be making at the end. So let me just talk about disruptive technologies now in a bit more detail. On this page, there's a definition, and I'm not going to go through it. You can read that. Just a couple of examples at the bottom. In social, just think of what's happened with newspapers over the last few years. A number of them going out of business as more and more information is disseminated via basically things like Twitter and Facebook and so on. So very disruptive in that industry. Mobile devices, the fact that basically tablets have replaced PCs and PCs have replaced typewriters and so on. So that's really what disruptive technology is, and the way in which we manage it often has to change as much as what the new technology is. So the next 4 pages I'm going to go through. I'm not going to go read the pages. You can read them. But rather what I'll do is I'll just tell you a little story or give you a little example on each of these pages of some of the challenges that have arisen as a result of each of these disruptive technologies. So in the terms of social computing, the one that came to mind over the last year is Ashley Madison. And a number of you may be familiar with the website. It's a dating website of sorts. And, of course, about a year ago, they were exposed to hackers who basically were able to get into the system. They were able to get the passwords and credit card information and name and address details of many of the clients of this website. And as a result, it created a lot of consternation, not only amongst the clients, but also obviously for the company itself, even resulting in a number of lawsuits and so on that are still ongoing. But the fact that now people communicate in many different ways, and this social computing, including things like this dating website, are certainly ones that organizations have to figure out how are we going to manage the fact that many different people now have access to our computing site and our technology, many more than in the past. In the terms of mobile computing, example here is really a utility company. And in Ontario, the geography where I live, there have been a number of utilities that have been deploying smart meters. And in one particular case, the smart meters were deployed. They used cell signals to communicate the results back. Unfortunately, in this particular case, there were a number of signal drop issues related to terrain, and those signal drop issues resulted in billing errors that later needed to be corrected. So once again, thinking about what are the implications of mobile computing, such as range and bandwidth, is an important fact of building your solutions. On the topic of analytics or big data, the example I'll use is another financial services company. In this particular case, they had a very visible customer application that was having numerous Sev1 outages. And because of the number of different systems that this particular application touched, identifying the root cause of those disruptions was becoming a real challenge. There was just far too much data, far too many possibilities to analyze by hand. And in essence, what was needed was a way of going through all of the logs, the transaction records, the incident tickets, the hardware records, and basically looking for trends to basically pull out what was the eventual root cause and solve the SEV1 issues. But that was a matter of really combing through a lot of data looking for the nuggets of information that would provide that solution. And then the last example is cloud. And with cloud, the target situation is the one that comes to mind. And once again, in the about the last year, and what happened there was they'd actually contracted with a number of cloud providers. They were looking for effectiveness and efficiency within their environment, a good thing to be doing. But as they established these contracts, one of the cloud providers dealt with HVAC services or heating, cooling kind of equipment. And it was through this particular cloud provider that a hacker was able to get into the rest of the network and therefore get access to a lot of credit card information. And that is very typical of the concerns that a lot of organizations look at when dealing with cloud computing. How can we manage and basically prevent that kind of embarrassing situation from occurring? So those are some examples of disruptive technologies. Let's take a look now at really how we might understand what the business requires and how we might turn that into some kind of a solution that allows us to not only address some of the concerns that we talked about a few minutes ago, but also create value for the customer in terms of what we build. And the first couple of slides I'm going to talk about really just go through what's really a fairly general approach to designing a strategy. There's nothing that should be particularly new at the top of this page. Things like understanding the business, the capabilities, the value change, building the change agenda, and so on are all things that we typically do as we look at a major change and how we might go around it and build a strategy. What's different is at the bottom of the page, and it's the fine-tuning of those strategy elements as it relates to those disruptive technologies that can present the challenge. Markets change very quickly these days. There's external events, security, political events that basically will require companies to respond very quickly. Consumer demand and expectations is on a much shorter cycle these days, and that will often change competitive landscapes very quickly. And so faster and more agile feedback loops are required for organizations to be able to change their strategy and change the implementation of that strategy in a way that addresses those issues. And that's part of what this approach that we're going to be talking about will help us do. To make it all work, though, there are a couple of critical success factors that need to be in place. And one of those is certainly an understanding and engagement with organizational culture. So no matter which of those disruptive technologies you're looking at, or for that matter, which large IT transformation you're looking at, making sure that organizational culture is both understood and addressed in the solution is absolutely critical. Certainly in my experience, I've seen more solutions go off the rails because this particular item has not been addressed than probably any other factor. And part of the reason is that the people who will be involved in making this work and making it happen, there's a lot of things that will change for them. There's new hierarchies, new skills, new workflows, new metrics, new priorities. And all of those things mean they have to unlearn some stuff and relearn some new stuff, form new relationships, and so on. And that's best depicted at the bottom with the Kubler-Ross change curve, well known example of the various stages of change and that individuals and organizations go through. Really starting with shock and denial often, frustration as people try to make it work, and so on. And to get to the end of that curve often takes 18 months. And obviously, and at that point, that's really when things are considered institutionalized and are going to take hold. And of course, the intent is if we can shorten that time and if we can improve the chance of success, both of those would be good. So things like communication and active participation of the people involved and so on are very important. An example from another engagement we did a few years ago. It was one that involved a lot of change within the organization, and there was one particular technical leader who absolutely was against it. Really, we fought hard to stop the changes, and we knew that if we didn't get this person on board, we weren't going to succeed. From an organizational change perspective, the momentum would have been against us. And so we invited this person to join our team, to join the core team, and to basically allow his views to be expressed as we went through the design process. And as we went through that process and this person gained a better understanding of what we were trying to do and why we were doing it and how it would impact the organization, he actually became the biggest advocate of what we were doing, and in the end was absolutely critical to selling this to the rest of the organization and helping them get on board. Now, your situation will be different. Each one you need to obviously think about in the context of the challenges you have. But the message really is understand what the issues are and what you need to do to be successful. The second critical success factor deals with governance mechanisms. And I've listed some on here, and most of these are just hygiene, basic hygiene, when you're dealing with advanced IT solutions, such as the SMAC stack that we talked about earlier. Just to give one example, service catalog. A lot of organizations have some kind of a service catalog in place, but often it may be more expectation related, or it may be informal. It may not have all of the commitments identified and so on. But as you move into some of these new technologies, and cloud is a perfect example for service catalog, you really do need the rigor there, because often it is a self-serve environment, and so things need to be laid out clearly. Often within that self-serve environment, you will acquire the service, you will use it, and then you will be billed for it all automatically. And the service commitments and the billing information, all of that needs to be contained within the service catalog. So that's just one of those governance mechanisms that really need to be in place and be well defined if we're going to be successful. You can read through the others. I will comment a bit more on the process framework, however, just to give you an idea of the number of processes that really need to be mature or greater as we're moving into a SMAC stack environment. So some of the processes you'll see on here will be ones that you've probably got in pretty good shape in your organization. Others may be ones that you know that there's some work that needs to be done. So as we take a look at the vertical columns, the mobile and cloud jump out. Basically, both of those require most of those processes to be mature or better if you're going to be successful. But even as we look at it horizontally, some of the processes, I'll just start at the bottom and work up. Service desk management. Basically, all of the SMAC stack, because you're dealing with a new set of clientele, and basically you're getting new issues that are coming from that, they all need to have a well-defined service desk environment in place, including things like knowledge management, incident management, and so on that support that. Asset and configuration management. A lot of new devices will need to be managed. A lot of new relationships between devices need to be understood. So that certainly needs to be in place and rigorously defined. And then just near the top, risk management. As we talked about earlier on, there are certainly a lot of new risks, and understanding what those risks are and how they're going to be managed. So all of that really is a critical success factor in that those base components need to be there before we start building on top of that. So with that background and those critical success factors out of the way, really want to talk now about the 7-step program, if you will, for basically deploying lean techniques that will help with deploying any of these SMAC technologies that we've talked about. And the first of the 7 steps is selecting and educating a team, and I've got a few slides to actually give you a bit of an insight in terms of what we mean by lean for those of you that may not be familiar with it as we go through the presentation. But once you've got the team in place, then you need to understand specifically the scope and objectives that the business is looking for and how to meet that. And then we'll start breaking things down into those smaller self-contained work units that I referenced earlier. And we'll do that by building and filling out something called a critical to quality tree. We'll look at a value stream map. We'll build an A3, which is a way of pulling all the pieces together. And then we'll look at how, in the final step 7, how we use something called Kaizen to basically generate that continuous improvement that we're looking for. So starting with basically lean as a way of thinking and acting. Just a few points on here to keep in mind. The first one is that lean really focuses on value, not on cost cutting or profit generation, which is often a motivation for some of these changes that come into our organizations. If you focus on value and delivering that value for the customer, understanding what that is, eliminating the waste that we'll talk about later, you'll find that the cost and the profit will take care of itself. So lean really says, let's focus on the lean. Lean thinking says, let's focus on the lean techniques, and then we'll allow the rest of the pieces to fall into place. Lean also looks for a smooth flow of work from the customer through to what's finally delivered. It uses something called pull as a way of obtaining the next piece of work. And I just want to spend a minute on pull because certainly a pull concept in manufacturing makes sense. You want another piece of work, you pull the previous work down. How does that work in IT, though, might be a question in your mind. And if you think through a cloud example, orchestration might be a good way of looking at this. In that many organizations that move to cloud do so because they want to reduce their inventory of servers. They don't want to have them sitting on the floor idle half the time or more. And so what they do is basically servers are created and basically used and then shut down on an on-demand basis and through a process called orchestration. So that whole concept of a request coming into a cloud provider to build a server image, the creation of that server image, and then the use of it is really a good example of a pull request where we don't have that inventory just sitting there waiting, but rather we build it. As the demand occurs, we use it, and then when it's done, we shut it down. So that's an example of what pull might look like in an IT environment. And then things like continual improvement, understanding the big picture, and teamwork are all part of lean thinking as well. This is what it looks like on a graphic, if you will. Same ideas, just shown with customer value at the center. That's really the heart of what we're trying to do. The value stream, which is really the things that are going to create value for the customer at the top. And then from that value stream, we create flow. We talked about the pull, and we're aiming towards perfection. And that's sometimes a new concept that's difficult to get our minds around because often we think of perfection as something that we may never get to. And yet within the concept of lean thinking, you're always striving to get to that, and the way that you do that is by making these small incremental improvements. And we'll talk about that towards the end of the pitch, how you make that happen. The other chart I just want to leave you before we actually get into the real steps is the lean principles that you'll need to understand. And on this particular page, you can see the plan, do, check, act cycle, the Deming cycle, if you will, shown in a slightly different way. And on the left, you'll see an inverted pyramid. That inverted pyramid is actually very much at the part of lean thinking. Certainly the strategy starts at the bottom with IT management, and it gets communicated up to middle management, the objectives, and to the delivery teams. But the reason for showing it this way is it's the delivery teams that are closest to the work being done. They're the ones who really understand what's working and what's not working, and the onus is on them to really feedback through that middle management and strategy layer what needs to be changed and why it needs to be changed. So that's why the inverted pyramid, the plan, do, check, we've talked about. As we go through the check and then into the act, however, there's a couple of other concepts I want us to be familiar with. One is the Kanban. And Kanban is a lean term that really talks about visual thinking. It's a visual way of management. And one of the things as we go through and we implement whatever it is that we're implementing, we make sure that it's well communicated, and we make sure we provide the opportunity for real-time feedback from all of those that are involved. And that's done through things like day start or week start meetings and communication tools. It's also done through another term that you'll see at the bottom of that called Hoshin. And Hoshin is a Japanese term that really talks about the creation of a 3 to 5 year strategic plan that gets translated into a 1 year annual stretch set of objectives around which a set of plans are developed. And then those plans are monitored for progress. And as necessary, modifications are made, and that's really part of that plan, do, check. Where we're taking that 5-year plan, and through this distillation, we're looking at the small pieces that need to be changed that will help us achieve that overall 3 to 5 year plan. And those year-to-year over lessons then basically continually to drive this plan, do, check, act cycle as we go through it. So that's one concept, the Kanban and the Hoshin. The last one is the Kaizen. And as I said, Kaizen events really are events that are around continual improvement through small incremental changes. So as we notice something that's not working, immediately we go in and we figure out how we might fix that, and we do that through a Kaizen event. And I'll talk about that a bit more towards the end as well. But wanted to introduce those terms and that flow to you at this particular point. So we're now ready to get into the remaining steps. And the first one really is creating the flow, if you will. Or creating the strategy that's going to create the flow, I should say. And many ways you can do this. The one that I'm depicting here is using the ITIL Strategy to do that, the method in the Service Strategy book. You may have your own, but whatever way you choose, it's important that we know where we are, where we need to be, what can be afforded, what the results will be, and basically how we get it. So the first step really, or really the second step after you've done the education, is to create your strategy using any technique, but this is the one that might certainly help if you don't have one. The second thing that you need to do before we actually get into how we create these small projects is you need to prioritize the strategy and the major objectives that come out of it. So this is a Kano diagram, one Kano chart, one way of doing a prioritization. Once again, you may have your own, but the intent here is to take a look at how well are requirements being fulfilled, or really how well is the value being created, and how satisfied are the customers. And those things that fit in the bottom right are things where there is a high requirement, but there's high dissatisfaction as well. Those are things that are expected and critical priority, and typically things that you would work on first. So as you break down your strategy and you take a look at what needs to be done, items that fall in that quadrant you would start with, and then you work around more or less in a counterclockwise direction, looking at the competitive items, kind of things that customers want, and so on through to innovation. So whatever technique you choose, you do need to narrow things down to basically a smaller set of high priority items that you're going to start with. Once you've got those in place, then we can start to identify, okay, now what are the initiatives that we're going to need to actually deliver this value? And a technique called a CSI value canvas, which you'll get more information on at the end, is really one way of translating that strategy and those objectives into a set of initiatives. And we do it from right to left in terms of planning, and then we implement or execute in terms of left to right. So we start with the strategy. What are the enablers necessary to make that strategy happen? What are the challenges that are going to be created? And then what are the initiatives? As we then build out those initiatives and develop the process, we address each of those challenges. We build the enablers or adjust the enablers accordingly, and we actually then fulfill the strategy using a set of controls to make sure that that flow works. So to give you an example, to make this a bit more real of how it might actually work, in this particular case, it's a cloud service strategy, and the strategy that we're trying to deploy here is to create high-value cloud applications. And as we work from right to left, as we build through, we try to understand from a cloud service provider the who and the how that those enablers need to be in place and what we expect from them. We look at what the challenges might be, so things like risk management and adjustment to service management processes that will be required. And then from that, we basically say, okay, one of the initiatives that's going to be necessary to deliver on that is a test environment for cloud. So we then start to build the process behind that, which we'll talk about in the next few pages. But as we're building that process and the underlying flow, what we're doing is we're addressing those challenges, making sure that they each get addressed in a way that ensures that they no longer remain a challenge, so removing waste or closing issues, closing gaps, and so on. And we're making decisions about the enablers and adjusting the enablers to basically match the initiative and the challenges we've got until we basically deliver on the strategy. All of that is managed with a set of metrics that you can see at the bottom of the page. So as we then take those initiatives that we've identified in that value canvas and we've created, we now need to start breaking those initiatives down into, okay, what are those changes that we're going to make? I mentioned a workflow and a set of processes before. Well, this is how we now start to identify what needs to happen there. And the critical to quality tree, very important in making that happen. It's a lean concept that really takes the voice of the customer. That's where we understand the business metric. That's where we understand the value that we need to create. And we say, if we're going to create that value, in this case, rapid deployment and reconfiguration, what are the critical to quality items, the CTQs, that are necessary? So things like image deployment time, availability, the currency of the image are all critical to the quality of ensuring that rapid deployment happens. And then for each critical to quality item, we need to understand what are the attributes by which we're going to measure that. So things like image deployment, you'll want to understand minutes to deploy, or for image currency, you'll want to understand number of defects. So with this, you've now got a picture of what the value statement is, rapid deployment, what the items are that are critical to quality, and some of the attributes that you need to build in. With that, you can then start to build something called a SIPOC, if you will, or SIPOC, depending on how you pronounce it, that will allow you to create the process workflow that's going to be necessary to support your initiative. On the SIPOC, you can see it starts suppliers on the left and works through to customers on the right. But really, we think about this from the right to the left again. So the exercise we just went through on the previous page was really understanding from our customers what their critical to quality items are. That's what we just talked about. And that defines the outputs that we're going to need to create. So we know now the outputs that our process in the middle needs to create, but to create those outputs, to make that process work, we need a set of inputs. And those inputs are going to come from a set of suppliers, which may be internal, may be another department, it may be external. But whatever those suppliers are, we're going to need to define the quality elements we require on those inputs so that the supplier knows what our expectations are. And we'll need measurements around those, and measurements become very important. I'll talk to those again in a few minutes, to build basically the flow and to be able to manage it. So once we understand those critical to quality elements and the measures, we can then build the process workflow at a mid-level using the selected process framework. Building that mid-level process workflow, something called a value stream, and basically a value stream is nothing more than a way of showing the flow of work from when it gets started through to the creation of the value element. The chart at the bottom left, the diagram at the bottom left shows the value chart we looked at earlier. That's really what we're trying to create. And really the VSM gives us a way of identifying gaps, identifying cycle times, and a way of looking at really where improvements need to happen. So once again, best way of talking about that is looking at an example. This is an example of a value stream for deploying a test image, carrying on with our example. So starting at request, going through to billing, those are the activities that need to happen. Down at the bottom, you can see the timings that are part of that. The timings at the top are the time in process, the times at the bottom, the times that are basically in between process and under waste. Out of that value stream map, we now have enough information where we can basically create the detailed process map. And this chart just really shows you some of the examples of why you need a value stream map, so things like looking at the big picture, looking at lead time, and why you need the process map, which is because you need to understand the actual sequencing in a way that allows you to build the detailed tasks and procedures that go under it. So both are needed if you're going to be successful. And the process map that eventually comes out to support your initiative is something like this. This is a particular activity. It's a testing example. But what is different now on this page, because you've probably created things like this before, is you can now tie each of the roles and the activities on this page very specifically back to the value-creating elements that are necessary, and therefore you can make informed decisions in terms of how you create each of those particular procedures and tasks that support the process. From that, you've now got all the information to build something called an A3. An A3 just pulls all this information together in a graphic way. Remember, we talked about the importance of Kanban and looking at things graphically, so that as the organization moves forward in terms of implementing this initiative, they have a way of looking at exactly what it is that's trying to be accomplished, the goals, the targets, the analysis, any proposed countermeasures that may be in place. Think back to the value canvas earlier where we identified those challenges. All of that gets represented here, and then we can build basically our detailed project plan. Just want to spend a couple of minutes on measurements. I've mentioned them a couple of times, and absolutely critical in ensuring your success. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, as the saying goes. And of course, with the core concept of lean and continuous improvement through measurement and small incremental improvement, you really do need to make sure you've got a good measurement system in place. So measurement starts with the big picture, key goal indicators. You need some measurements around that. And you work down the various levels through to the bottom of that chart, where really you're looking at how each element is working, or the key fact metrics. Each of the measurements cascading down and back up to feed information on each level of the analysis. The other thing that you need is a mix of leading and lagging indicators to show really where customer satisfaction is in terms of lagging, how you might need to improve it, or in terms of a leading indicator, things like number of indicators may indicate a particular problem developing. So make sure you've got a mix of both leading and lagging indicators. And you can pull all this together into a chart that looks like this. Basically, the top three layers on here represent the voice of the customer, the things that you're going to do to create value. The bottom two on here represent really the performance of the initiative that you've created. The example that I might use on this is around mobility. So you want to create an agile mobile environment. That requires an ecosystem that's available down on the next level. That requires on the third level a set of processes that are efficient. To do that, on the fourth level down, you need to basically understand the mean time to recovery and the failed RFCs, requests for changes. And you get the raw data from that, from things like problems, which can then influence the way in which you deal with the performance metrics. Will tell you what changes need to be made to the efficiency of the process and on up. So this really is a hierarchy that you need to work up and down with your metrics. I said I'd mention Kaizen again, continuous improvement. That's really what we get to in the last step, where we've implemented now. We've got our metrics in place, and we're looking for where things are working, where they're not. Then basically doing these small changes that we will learn from and we will continue to improve as we go through. And that learning not only applies to just this particular initiative, but also to the other initiatives that we need to look at. So you can see around here some of the things that you need to think about when you're looking at Kaizen, things like correcting mistakes when you find them and not waiting. And it all pulls together in a chart that looks like this. If you will, the performance level is the vertical axis. That's what we're trying to improve. The horizontal axis is the time scale. And basically, as we go through each plan, do, check, act cycle, we're moving up the line from efficiency and effectiveness basically towards creating that value that the customer expects. And that's really at the heart of both Lean and Kaizen. So this last page, I'm not going to go through it. It's really just there for you to look at when you've got some time and think about some of the issues that you might have to deal with and some of the ways in which you might deal with those issues as you deploy your SMAC stack or whatever solution it is that you're looking at. So with that, David, I'll turn it back to you. I think you've got a couple of slides that you just want to review quickly with the folks.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks so much. Okay, yes, I just wanted to give some tips on how to get started. We've included some attachments to your presentation that you can get a link to a starter kit. Starter kit, one of the things that we'll give you is a free value canvas that Keith referred to, and there's an online orientation on how to use that. Also, to make you aware that one of the major things that Keith had mentioned is about getting education. So we've provided some links on how to get access to Lean certification as well as cloud certification, and then offering you access to get help by strategy workshops if that's something of interest to you. There's a certification path here. LEADA is the Lean IT Association offering the Lean certification path, and then we've got Cloud Credential Council, who has a number of cloud offerings that take you right from general understanding through to professional. And we are Micromation. There's our website. Last, I just wanted to end up, I did see a question come in, so I'm going to flip over and see here. As quoted by Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What would you suggest to address the culture challenges? Okay, Keith, can you see this question here on the screen?
I can't see it, but that's okay. I've got I got the gist of what it is that we're looking for. So that absolutely, and that was why my critical success factor number one was really talking about organizational culture and the importance of ensuring that that's understood and addressed. So things like the aggressive communication, the participation, alignment, education, all of those things need to happen. And if they don't, although you've got the best strategy in the world, if the people who are on the front line who are basically responsible for making it happen don't buy in and they aren't behind the strategy, it's going to fail. So I absolutely agree with your question and comment and with Drucker. And that's why organizational culture was critical success factor one.
Great. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for attending our session. I would just like to remind you as you close out here, there is a ratings survey that we would really appreciate any feedback that you could give us. It helps us to shape and improve our own capability here, doing our own Kaizen. So look forward to hearing any feedback that you have and hopefully you attending our next session, which is coming up next month. Okay, thanks again and bye for now.